Yes.
Heck yeah. I've also got a whole bunch of water jugs if we want to do some cutting with my sharps out in the back.
Heck yes.
I think for science reasons we owe it to our listeners.
I think so.
All right, so we're going live in 3, 2, 1, and. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jake with Fightsword Radio. We are officially at episode 1 of Fightsword Radio. We have here with us today Chad Healy with TrueEdge Academy, John Cheney, one of my good boys, and myself, your resident Mongoloid sword fighter. Let's kick this thing off. All right, Chad, let's take it over to you for just a second. So what is your background with sword fighting?
Okay.
Sword play.
So, I'm one of those guys that's always loved swords my entire life. Started with Lord of the Rings, Pirates of the Caribbean, all that stuff growing up. Found a HEMA video online a few years ago and just fell in love, became super passionate about it, and I've been practicing 3 times a week for the last 4 years or so. I'm the head instructor at our local branch, and I've been teaching for just under 4 years.
Now, how long you been doing HEMA? How long has that been a thing again?
About 4 years, actually.
Okay, so you started teaching and practicing simultaneously. Okay.
Yeah. So I attended a class for a couple of months, and then the instructor had to go home to some other state for a while and kind of left it in my hands as a beginner. So I started attending another club up in Salt Lake, just religiously. And
now, is that Jordan Hinckley? Is that group?
So Jordan Hinckley does UCSA.
Okay.
So they're another Salt Lake group.
Okay.
But yeah.
Gotcha. All right, and so there ends the background for sword play with yourself, yeah.
Sword play with myself. Yeah.
Okay, now John, where's your background at? You go back quite a ways, actually.
I go back quite a ways, but I think it's also worth noting that Chad may be one of the finest swordsmen I've ever met.
I've sparred with you. You're actually really good. I'm like, yeah.
Oh, thanks, guys.
He's got a mind for it. He's got a body for it. Yeah.
You do look like you've been cutting back some weight.
Yeah,
you were talking about that before we went live.
But
Yeah,
you don't look heavy. You just look manly. AF. Nicely done.
Yeah.
I hope to look as manly AF as you guys someday. That's what I'm going for.
Well, I look slightly emaciated. I can't seem to gain weight no matter what I do. But thanks. All right. So yeah, where's your background at, John?
So I've always been interested in swords. Even from as a little kid, my favorite toy in the whole wide world was not my Sega Genesis. It was not my pellet gun. It was a silly little tent pole that had somehow fallen out of a bag in the back storage room, and I would spend all day long swinging at weeds, trees, and literally anything else in our yard back home in Oregon, which was great because just the weeds grow crazy there. And when I moved to Utah about 18 years ago, I joined a local Haedam Gumdo Korean-style sword fighting place, and did that for about 10 years.
Now, remind me, what is Haedam Gumdo?
Haedam Gumdo is just Korean-style sword fighting. Korea is kind of like Asia's Poland.
Yeah.
They were getting invaded by everyone all the time.
Sure.
And so I really liked the concepts behind their styles. Very, all the fat's cut off.
Yeah.
Only the good meat's left. Lots of very powerful, efficient, very non-indicative of what most people know about me now.
Yeah. Sure. I like that a lot. I congratulate your self-awareness.
Thank you. It does come in little, brief moments of cognitive salience followed by horrible sanity. Anyways, after going to college, I joined a local Olympic fencing group.
Okay.
I did that for 3 or 4 semesters. They couldn't get rid of me. I was like a bad smell. I just loved it.
Yeah.
And to this day, I probably perform anywhere from 300 to 500 cuts a day whenever I can. Take the dogs out, do the cuts. Time to feed the dogs, go out and get their food from the shed, do the cuts.
Yeah.
Waiting for my laundry to go over, I'm going to go out and do 50 more cuts. Something about it just charges my batteries. Anyways, after that, I joined the ACL, Armored Combat League.
Okay.
It's gone through so many different names. I don't know how relevant
it's a new alphabet soup league every couple of years.
Right.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, I had never even heard of HEMA.
Okay.
Saw them performing one day and thought, well, I could do that.
Yeah.
And that's how I met Chad. I haven't been as active recently, especially since with COVID with HEMA as much as I'd like. But I've purchased all the manuals. I practice them in my backyard. I even almost don't want to admit this, blew 20 grand of my own money researching and building the world's most perfect HEMA sword.
Yeah, I've used this thing. It's ridiculous.
They call
it incredible.
They call it
like this one
using cheat codes.
Yeah, it is. It's a cheat code.
Yeah, and that turned me into the geometry of weapons, and then from there I've been chasing down this, I've been spurging out on the rabbit hole of universal geometry and golden ratios and how that applies to all weapons.
Yes.
Dating back to ancient times. And that's me. Resident loudmouth who's in love with the sound of his own voice happens to swing a weapon at a time.
Yeah, I don't think you could say yes fast enough. I was like, I want to put a microphone in front of your face and record your thoughts and put it on the internet.
Why do you gotta call me out like that?
Hey, you were getting sassy at practice earlier. I gotta get my licks in. And then for the benefit of my listeners, I started out with BOHURT sword fighting in the backyard. It was actually like plastic swords when I was way younger, and then a neighborhood kid called me up and says, "Hey, you want to come play LARP?" I'm like, "What's that?" It was live action role play. We hit each other with foam swords, and I was over there as fast as I could, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a bunch of fat, undateable nerds, and there's a sentient bipedal mass of acne with Coke bottle glasses speaking perfect Klingon, In fairness to him, it was a good joke, is in good taste about the Romulan Empire, so good for him. It was just duct tape swords and bad costumery, and together we called ourselves the Unfuckables, and yeah, so that's where that started, and then I ended up with the Belgarth Medieval Combat Society, which is, again, it's foam fighting, it's stick tag in the park, and did that until 2014 when I discovered the Armored Combat League, now Armored Combat Worldwide, and left everything else behind for this, and for the sake, and we're going to spend a couple minutes just getting into defining now our respective disciplines. This is actually why I assembled us, as I'm just pure armored fighting. I've never taken like a proper sword fighting class a day in my life. I am, like, my fighting style and knowledge is the gutter trash of sword fighting.
Jake, I fought you. I believe you.
Somehow I keep bracking up national championships, but, no one can figure out why. And then, we have Chad Healy, who's very, I've sparred with you in a HEMA setting. I wasn't wearing the mask, so we didn't, incorporate thrusts. But, I've thought about it. I'm like, man, if, the bombs went off and the guns were gone and there was no more electricity and we had to fight each other for a can of beans, and Chad and I faced off with swords at a grocery store, I don't know that I'd win. I'd probably die.
As long as people record it, because that would be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be a good fight. Yeah, that'd be a good fight. And then, John's kind of right down the middle. I mean, he's got an extra repertoire, but it's like, so you got very pure HEMA, and then you got pure armored fighting, where it's like, it's like we eat crayons and fight, and there's a lot. HEMA's much more, the
I'm kind of a weird hybrid of the two.
Yeah,
like Forrest Gavin, who likes to. Yeah.
So I think, a good function of this episode of the podcast is to, HEMA and armored fighting, they are, in my opinion, they're different facets of the same effort, which is to understand how people used to kill each other with sharp metal objects, right? And used to fight each other with them. And so much of what we're here to discuss is, how they respectively benefit, and, if they can cross-pollinate. So let's get into our first question with you guys. Well, in fact, let's just define armored fighting, because we might have listeners to this that don't know anything about this. Armored fighting, we are wearing historically analogous armor, and we're using historically analogous weapons, and we're using a historical rule set for tournament fighting. So what we're doing is actually historical sport combat. It's based on a rule set called King René's Tournament Manual, and it's a 15th century German tournament rule set. So they did have sport combat, and
which is funny because King René was actually French.
Was he?
Yeah.
How about that? Well, that'll be an interesting question to explore. And then, if you could give us a 30-second explanation of HEMA and what it is.
Sure. So HEMA is just very manual based. It's trying to understand from contemporary sources how sword fighting was done.
Okay.
Historically, right? So fencing masters would be hired to write books for, government officials or lords, so that they could have their own personal copy of this is how to sword fight.
Yeah.
And researchers have found those books in libraries and museums, and they have been translating them for us to read and try out.
Now, I've heard it argued that a lot of those manuals were aimed specifically at judiciary duels as opposed to just raw sword fighting. Someone jumps you on the street. Can you clarify that?
So, yeah. Talhofer is a good example. Sorry, I'm just looking at John.
Yeah.
Talhofer is a good example. He has a lot of judiciary duels. He's got the famous man versus wife, where the man is with a club in a hole and the wife has a bunch of rocks in her veil, and they're fighting, to solve who knows what.
You can't make this up.
You can't. It's amazing. And they have the funniest costumes. But, a lot were. But then a lot of them, to my understanding, were this is how you become a well-rounded swordsman. A lot of the Zettel, for instance, is teaching, knights, soldiers, how to... Thanks for the reminder, John.
Yeah. If you're going to look, you just kind of rotate around it. Yeah.
Pivot.
I'm glorious to behold, so I can't blame you.
Okay. You are indeed, John. So the Zettel, for instance, the recital, it was written by disciples of Johannes Lichtenauer, who was the Grand Master of the German tradition, essentially. And I know I'm going long here.
Yeah,
Sorry, Jake.
You're good.
But it's my belief that was to train knights. And half of it is unarmored, so Blossfechten, and the other is Hannesfechten, where it's like, what do you do when you got a lance and a sword and a dagger, and you're fighting another guy in full armor with a lance and a sword and a dagger? So
okay. Yeah, so it's almost like there's a little bit of conversation within that ecosystem of, well, is this part of the manual judiciary? Is it for field combat? Is it for... Check.
You were getting kind of soft there for a sec. I can hear you because you have a glorious voice, but I couldn't hear you through this.
Interesting. Okay. I'll be more careful. But yeah, so there's a conversation within that ecosystem of, is this for judiciary fighting? Is this for field fighting? Is this for, rich guys that are at boarding school, their kids are at boarding school, and this is how they measure, yeah, so there is a bit of a conversation about that. Okay.
Right.
And that's actually, it's kind of interesting that you bring that up, like within the armored curator community, where they're looking at armor and weapons. Was this parade armor? Was this for field armor? They look at an effigy, which, again, if you don't know what an effigy is, it's like if someone was laid to rest in a coffin, the lid will be carved with their likeness. And the question is, well, if it's a person who's wearing armor, was that field armor? Was that out of somebody's imagination? So that's an interesting part of the conversation. I think that's where armored fighting with what it is and HEMA with what it is kind of offer some answers as to the why, right? So now that we've defined these two disciplines. Now,
you got to turn up your mic just a bit. The moment you turn your head even a little bit, we lose you.
Check. Yeah, I'm getting gain, so whatever. We'll figure it out. I'll pull up my notes here. We'll get to the next point that we want to talk about. So I'm thinking at this point what we want to get into the conversation is, what we want to talk about is how they separately offer insight into fighting with medieval weapons. So you answered some of that question with, you have fighting manuals. When you open a fighting manual, what are you looking at? And let's get this from both of you guys.
Do you want to see? I'm going to go grab some books.
Yeah, go ahead. And while we're waiting for him, John, maybe you can offer some descriptors.
I'm terribly dyslexic.
Okay.
And very much a kinesthetic visual learner. Within that sphere of understanding, I have a nearly eidetic recall, but you take strange words that had no conformity in their spelling and try to translate that from German to English, chances are I'm not going to follow a lot of what's in the manual.
Sure.
So I will look up the title of that chapter, and I will type that into Google, and I will see what other people have said about it, and then I will follow that video. And I found that most people will deviate a little bit here and there.
Okay.
And a lot of that is, I hate to even call them that because they're putting the work out there. They're putting their neck on the line. Some of them are a little more armchair warrior-esque. Yeah. Some are a little bit more want to get into the thick of it and try it. And I have found that a good sampling of both should give you a fairly accurate example of the translation of a manual. That's how I do it personally, as someone who is very visual and is going to struggle with very strange sentences.
Yeah. Well, I think I've tried to read like medieval English, and it's indecipherable. Like they didn't want to translate the Bible into English for a reason. It's because it was like a gutter language.
Actually, funny, it was so hard to translate the King James into English from Latin that they actually translated it back into Biblical Hebrew, and then from Biblical Hebrew into English.
That doesn't shock me, even one little bit. All right, so let's get a look at what these manuals look like.
Okay, so this is a compilation of different sword masters' recitals. They're versions of Johannes Lichtenauer's recital, or Zettel. So when you open these up, you're looking at, a lot of illustrations.
Okay.
So taking a step back, this is years of research and planning and organization that I'm holding here in my hands. What researchers find, and I wish that
Could you describe for our listeners in case they can't see this?
Sure. So you're seeing beautiful colored illustrations of fencers holding positions that are described in a play. You're also looking at the text describing what they're trying to describe, what they're depicting as well.
Okay. So if you were to open a manual, you would see a picture, and then beside the picture, a commentary on that picture.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. And that's half the effort.
That's the
exactly.
hope. That's the hope.
Yeah. That's if you get lucky.
What I was getting to is that this being, years of research and compilation from scholarly gentlemen and gentlewomen.
Yeah.
Basically, when you found one of these books, it is going to be a patchwork of the information in this book. So you'll find some plays that you can match to other plays, and then the people that organize them all together. So you're looking at 3 versions of one play described right here. I've also got another version that came out recently where it's 5 different fencing masters, and they're all organized in the same way. I love the thing. I bought 2 copies for no good reason.
Yeah.
But
share the love.
Dude, it's right over there if you want to go grab it.
I
Big
will.
long boy on top of my...
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. But yeah, so essentially, obviously, it would be written on historical medieval paper.
Yeah.
Vellum, probably.
Vellum. Mm-hmm. And, they had their beautiful calligraphy. It was scattered all over the page. And translators and transcribers worked on it together to translate it into different languages. And so thanks to those guys, we have these fencing treatises in English, and we can read them. And if you'd like, just to demonstrate what John was saying about the complexity of the language, even when being translated, it can be...
well, just give us a good soundbite there.
Yeah, give me a soundbite. I want to hear this.
Okay.
Yeah, get in your mic, too.
So this is from Danzig. Mark, when you come to him with the pre-fencing, then stand with your left foot before and hold your sword on your right shoulder. If he then hews above into your head, and then turn your sword and hew long against his hew with the short edge over his sword with stretched arms above into his head. If he is then clever and fails with the hew, and will change through below your sword, then let the point shoot in long before you with the hew, so he may not change through below.
Yeah, so I'm just going to have you... this is what went through my mind.
Okay.
Let me just tell you what went through my mind. Okay, you ready?
Please.
Hold on, let me hit the button.
Bruh.
That was it. That's what I was thinking the whole time. Like, none of that makes sense,
Right. Right.
Try being dyslexic and reading that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's a trip.
So I type in the play into and see if anyone else has played a video of it, and I watch it. It works really well, actually.
I'm sure it does. And yeah, so again, looking at this as just a crayon-eating, smashy boy, I basically, it's like, okay, let's look at the picture book. Let's try to, develop a vocabulary. It seems there's a lot of terms in there that they didn't bother to write this for somebody to read 400 years later. They wrote it for themselves. So it seems like there's a lot of effort that you got to put into just defining a lot of terms, and that, and now you're dealing with linguistics.
Right.
And, linguists are a bit like, if you don't agree with them, that's their response.
Yeah.
So there's that effort, there's the effort of trying to deal with some linguistics, and then, mimicking what you see in the pictures and trying to sort of reverse engineer.
So remind me, what was the original question again?
It's, how does the HEMA, such as it is, enable us to understand how swords were used? And I feel like that's actually a fairly good tool. I mean, it seems like a long way to very accurately reverse engineer swordplay. Yeah.
And the thing that I always tell our students is people who say that they do HEMA and they've never cracked open a book, they don't do HEMA.
Okay.
Because HEMA is a collective effort to rediscover how sword fighting was done from contemporary sources.
Yeah.
The actual sword fighting, the actual drills and hitting each other, that is just the extra fun part that we do for exercise. And really what we want to do is dissect and understand, that strange terminology. For instance, the change through. In German, it's the Durchwechsel. And there is a section in the Zettel on the Durchwechsel. The thing is, he doesn't do it how we organize things, where he starts with basics.
Yeah.
Thank you. Where he starts with basics and then moves on building off of those basics. He kind of does, but he'll reference the Durchwechsel before you've gotten to the Durchwechsel section. And so you kind of have to read it multiple times through to get a solid understanding of, what he's getting at.
Okay. You had a thought?
Well, it's interesting. So there's this classic argument between like who is the quote unquote better fighter, and I hate to even go down this rabbit hole because it serves no purpose.
Yeah.
Because you look at a boxer, right? Well, that's technically a sport, but you put a boxer in a ring with most other people who are quote unquote fighters, and he'll beat the crap. He'll crush them. Because there's a certain things that cannot be taught in books, such as the ability to roll with the punches, the ability to
I was going to get to this.
To dictate and control the tempo of the fight, and that is only accomplished with what you and I would call hat time.
Yeah.
And so one of the first time, so I will admit here for the record that Chad is a better fighter than me, and how much it pains me for me to say that. Shush.
So debatable. Okay.
Yet our first time we ever fought, I beat the crap out of him.
Yeah.
Because I used a technique I learned that was not found in a book.
Yeah.
I literally just did sloppy versions of proper guards, and he was like a snake in winter. His brain was heavily programmed at the time. He isn't like this anymore.
Yeah.
Heavily programmed at the time to recognize if they're in this position, I do this. If I'm in this position, I do that.
Okay.
And I was like, what position am I in? Ha 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 ha, stab. What position am I in? Ha 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 ha, hit.
That's flug, but it's wrong.
Yes.
And I think that's actually what you guys have been talking about is a really good transition into armored fighting and say what it offers that. And armored fighting, we just we kind of let me pull up a board here. This is what I became aware of HEMA and its existence not long after I started doing fully armored fighting. And HEMA, since 2014, when I got into full contact steel, has come a hell of a long way. You can see the evolution, and it's awesome, and it's really impressive to watch two high-level practitioners go at it hammer and tongs. I really enjoy it. But like we all looked at it and we're like, picture books, reading,
Yeah.
Gay!
That's what we were all thinking.
Yeah.
We just, I didn't respect it. I'm like, all right, have your picture book, drink your cheese, drink your wine, eat your cheese, and talk about it.
Go sit on your armchair.
Yeah.
And be a warrior.
Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah.
You guys are killing me. It's so true.
Because armored fighting, you are so unfettered because you're wearing armor. And I'll be interested to see if I develop CTE, from all the headshots I've taken. It never hurts, but it doesn't stress your body the way the cage fighting does because you're wearing a metal exoskeleton that protects you. I mean, you'll take hits and you're like, when you have, a 6-pound halberd swung by a 6.5-pound man that's trying to cut you in half.
6.5-pound man?
It's 6.5-foot tall man, sorry. Yeah, big dudes hitting you with big choppy boys. The things that, I've learned from armored fighting is I've learned to temper my fear. It's very anxiety inducing, especially for me. I'm under 200 pounds. The average American armored fighter is like 235 and 6'3". It's John and on up.
Is average.
So guys like me generally aren't successful. I'm an aberration in my ability to succeed in this sport. But, the truth of the matter is that you find out, I'll see a HEMA-ish maneuver, or I'll see something that HEMA does, and I do a version of that, and I go, okay, well, that explains why when a 12 o'clock shot is coming in at my head, it's don't hard stop it, provide an angle, and it redirects it. It answers the why, answers those whys very quickly. But, more to the point is you learn to fortify your mind against fear and against pain. You've been knocked out once, and you've been concussed, I think, twice. You've
concussed twice, knocked out once.
Yeah, because I mean the knockout was more of a hit a nerve back here.
Yeah, it was a very rare helmet failure.
Yeah.
So as you learn to build armor and build weapons, you'll learn that they were building their helmets in this is I know I'm going off topic here for a second.
Go ahead though.
But it was essentially an old Crusader's bucket.
Yeah.
And those things were made with mild steel. So those flat edges were designed to crumple. That thing was made out of stainless. So it didn't behave in the manner that it would have if it was made of mild. If it had been built historically accurate, I would have been fine. But it wasn't. So it just turned and hit me in the neck and pinched a nerve and knocked me out.
Well, no shit.
Yes. I got to use that.
Dude, I need to get one of those and carry it around with me every day and just respond to normal conversations.
I was teaching O2 today some how to build momentum with a great sword without burning up all of your oxygen and whatnot. And he whipped it around and hit me in the helm so dang hard that it actually gave me a moment to pause. But I watched the video, but the helmet, because it's made out of spring, and historically it was made out of spring, it actually deflected, which means at least 45% of that force was deflected off me. It didn't go into my skull.
Yeah, and so one again for listeners that don't know what armored fighting is injuries that I've delivered as a little guy that's confined in a straitjacket of my own scar tissue. Therefore I don't hit as hard. I've separated multiple shoulders. I've separated clavicles. I've dished out concussions. I've partially dislocated. I don't even know what the right term is, but you hit the hip and all of a sudden it doesn't work right. Is that a dislocation or?
Well, you could just be hitting the sciatic nerve.
Yeah, that's possible.
And it's just causing a vasovagal response.
Yeah, and I've cracked I've cracked people's ribs. I've broken fingers in people's hands. And this is just me. There are people with a much longer rap sheet than me on the injuries that they've put out. So. Just in case anybody's not clear on this is a full contact fighting sport. It's MMA with swords, and so you're at risk for your safety.
A bit. The idea is to defeat somebody through pain compliance.
Yes. The three metrics for victory are knockdown, so you get them on the ground, knockout, or submission, and that's again part of that antique rule set. But so I feel like where there's the historical value of looking at the manual and sort of reverse engineering through historical research, reverse engineering the fighting styles. But then you just go at it with proper intent with weighted weapons that are and we're going to talk about this later with designing weapons. But weapons and armor that were designed that way, you find out why things were the way they were very rapidly, because if you do it wrong, you pay, and sometimes in blood. It's a bad time.
Well, one of the things I think that's always drawn me to swordsmanship is the philosophy of it. Take typical politics. Rabbit hole I won't go down.
Yeah.
But I will just say most bad ideas aren't really felt or seen till 30 years later, and by that point, they forget who implemented the bad idea.
Yeah.
In sword fighting, if you do something stupid or something wrong, you died, which is one of the reasons why there's so much cross-pollination in between the Eastern sword styles and the Western sword files. And me as a practitioner of both, I see a ton of similarities because there's really only so many ways to stab somebody with a bit of pointy steel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Oh yeah.
And I love that about swordsmanship. It is a well honed blade for, oh gosh, that was quick cheesy, but it is absolute distilled truth, and I love that.
Yeah. And I like that you say that, absolute distilled truth. If it works, it stays, and if it doesn't work, it's gone.
You've gone.
With the with like the exception of like Japanese swordplay, because they had 3.5 centuries of nothing to do, so they came up with you got like
glorious Nippon steel.
It's like a bunch of warriors with nothing to do. They came up with some weird shit.
Yes.
Glorious.
I made that one myself.
I love it.
Okay.
Actually, you should mention that. A lot of people who study sword history and are into that aren't aware of what the Portuguese sailors did to the samurai in Japan when the East finally met West. Let's put this one to bed.
All right, yeah. So the Portuguese explorers got to Japan, and they had swords, and the Japanese had swords. So it wasn't that long before they had duels. And just like in the West and the East, there was like, let's fight, and we'll have a gentleman's agreement about the rules of engagement, and we'll see who's better. Miyamoto Musashi was famous for this. He won 60 duels or something, like more than anybody else. Right. Well, Portuguese explorers were just crushing samurai, so they outlawed dueling in port cities because they got tired of their best warriors losing to these round-eyed, fair-skinned gaijins, just rolling them up. And this is actually, this is why we got to have another podcast after John has gone through some Hayden Gumdell with you and with HEMA. It boggles my mind just how grotesquely inferior katanas were to longswords.
It really is.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go down this rabbit hole with you guys for just a second.
You're talking to a man who dedicated 10 years of his life to trying to master one, and I can tell you right here and now that the longsword is infinitely superior to the katana in nearly every possible way.
Yes. And okay, so as a bladesmith, this is actually one of the things that I'm actually going to introduce this as an idea to the discussion. Is this is what's nice to be an armor, a swordsmith, and a fighter. You find out why real fast. I got to use this soundboard really quick. I just got to do it.
Why? I
love my soundboard. It makes me so happy, dude. Well, this is one of those things that I discovered is sword geometry. We were talking a little bit about the 7 concentric circles of swords, and this is a breakthrough that I think a guy in Ukraine made. Whoever you are, I love you. Yes, big hearts. You know what?
Oh, that's that good shit.
Is understanding sword geometry. So you have, we'll take a sword. If you could actually hold this thing up. This is kind of a goofy sword. It's a judiciary
dueling sword. So it's Italian.
Yeah.
And this sword, goofy design was not by accident. Even down, one of the reasons I love Italians and Italian swords, Italian food, and Italian bikes, and Italian cars, they're obsessed with the female form in so much that even the rascal of this sword is the shape of a woman. You have the shoulders here, the rib cage here, and the hips. That was not by accident.
So were cellos and violins of Italian make because they were made in the likeness of a woman? I mean, probably.
I know I'm like the bearer of obscure secrets and stuff, but honestly, I have no idea.
Okay, well, fair enough.
But even I'm going to point this towards when you go into a duel. I study mostly, even though this is Italian sword, I'm going to use German technique, and I'm going to mispronounce it. I'm just warning you.
That's okay.
There's a point where you go into something called the Krieg. Okay, the Krieg is when I'm standing in a position where I can strike you from where I am with a single step.
Okay.
So I can actually score a point or kill you. If I can enter the Krieg before you realize it, I am already more than likely to win that fight.
Okay.
The unusual spatula-like shape of this sword is such that it causes an optical illusion, so when I point it directly at your eyes, it becomes very difficult to perceive its actual length, thus giving me an advantage to enter the Krieg.
That's actually an Eastern technique too. They do similar thing because like our eyes measure lateral distance really well, and we can measure linear distance, but not as well as lateral. So it's hard to measure. Yeah.
To piggyback on that,
yeah.
One of the 4 basic guards in German longsword is Flug, which is the plow, which your sword is pointed at your opponent's eyes for that exact same reason.
It's good for entering the Krieg, but
Exactly.
I never stay in Flug once the fight's actually begun.
Flug is my favorite. I mean, once we're both in the Krieg, I don't go back to Flug because that's just giving your head up.
Yes.
Right?
Unless it's good for striking, it's good for...
So good for thrusts.
For thrusts. But I prefer...
Flug is good for thrusts.
Flug is good for thrusts.
Okay. Well, I'm just like,
Wow.
all of these German...
But I love that, what is that?
Mind your mic.
Long nut?
Oh, jeez.
What is it? It's Fiores. Long nut? What is that one?
Are you talking Langnot?
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Yeah, German long point.
Long point.
Yeah.
Dude, I'll take long point over Flug any day.
Well, Flug transitions beautifully into long point.
Yes, it
long
does.
point says, don't get close to me. Flug says, come on over, buddy. I'm going to stab you in the face. I love it. Sorry.
I'm listening to all these German names for this, and it sounds like the names of like exotic dancers at like a German dungeon porn themed gentleman's club, you know?
Get Flug back on the stage.
We have coming to the stage the Flug, and she brings with her the iron gates. Don't let your Fettensputer get caught in there. And up next, we bring you Scheidelfrau. I just came up with that.
That is beautiful.
That was brilliant.
Oh my gosh.
Brilliant.
I'm probably red-faced right now. That was perfect.
So what was the original question before I got off topic? I'm sorry.
Let's see. So we were still just talking about like armored fighting and what it does for...
katanas and how they relate to longswords.
Yeah.
So There's a reason the katana was not a primary weapon. It was a secondary weapon.
Yeah.
It's a ceremonial weapon by the time they started getting with Westerners. Properly blocking with a sword requires you to use the quillions and the schlitz.
And they don't have those.
They don't have those, so essentially the blade is both your offense and your defense. So you're inherently fighting at a handicap compared to somebody who has 100% of their offense available, even while using their defense. It's actually how... Last time we fought, I didn't beat you because I'm better than you. I beat you because you were handicapped by having to use a sword that has to split its blade between two concepts.
Yeah.
I did not.
Yeah. And, like, I've actually noticed this, and a couple things I've actually noticed about katanas. They hit like trucks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because they have...
Especially with proper mechanical use.
Oh, yeah.
Biomechanics.
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for.
Oh, yeah. They are
real bad.
sturdily built.
Yeah, so, and some of that is just the triangular geometry. If you go from the edge to the thickest part of the sword, the shape is a triangle, which is the strongest shape in nature. And then the curve, the curve also makes it like, it, you know, when you hit it, this is one of the weaknesses of a straight blade that I've discovered, is you hit a target, and then all this extra mass ahead of the point of impact towards the tip, it wants to keep going. Now, the Europeans had an answer for this, but what would happen is you can actually see this on... more cheaply built swords for armored fighting is they'll hit and then like they'll flex around like that, like a noodle, and it can actually cause the sword to break. It can cause the sword to break. Now, the European answer to that problem was that if you look at the edge of the sword from the strong all the way up to the tip, all the way up to the weak into the tip, is that it gets progressively thinner. This is called a distal taper. So that was their answer to that problem. So the sword is thinner and lighter, and you can flex it more easily, but in combat, it actually hits a lot harder. Katanas don't really have that problem just because of that curve and the triangular geometry. It takes exponentially more force to make them flex, which is good because they don't have a spring temper, but we don't need to get into I'll talk about that on another podcast. But that's actually something that I did discover about these swords. Is I was used to having my guard, my guard on my Fabry. It's all just, you can get a look at that. It's just chewed to bits.
Yeah.
That's 4 years of catching strikes.
And that first time we fought, you held it up, and I was just like, headshot. And you're like, why isn't this blocking?
Yeah, and that was really frustrating, because I was just used to I'll just guide it down my sword right into that corner, and then it would just follow the curve of the sword right to my forehead every time. And I'm like, why is this not working? So frustrated. I can take that back when you're done looking at it.
I will say this. In the katana's defense, if you are going to dedicate your whole life to mastering it, the inherent inferiorities that its design possesses will not hamper you much, if at all.
Right.
Because you will learn to fight around those. I'm just saying, if you're freshly picking up a sword,
it's a problem.
It's a problem.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
And this was something that we had the luxury of discovering just because of when you're wearing armor, you really don't have to care if you hurt each other. You can use a 5-pound sword. And that's one of the benefits of the culture. If you get hurt, it's your fault. Don't get mad at the guy you're fighting. There's other places for people like you. It's not here.
It's not here.
Get good.
Get good,
well,
scrub.
I like it because you get a lot of trash talkers. And they don't stay around for long, or they don't fight often.
Yeah.
Because
facts.
You facts, and you have to back up what you say.
Yeah. And the more the fact is, we really can screw each other up really bad. There are a lot of opportunities I have to put down injuries, and I don't because I like you. It's hard. It's hard to injure people you like. People you don't like, I can't wait. Yeah. It's like, oh, you have an opening on the back of your greave. I wonder if I can hit that calf hard enough it rips your Achilles tendon out of your knee. It's like, I haven't had the chance yet. Coming for you. You know who you are.
Oh man, this is exciting.
So basically, kind of what I've gathered so far from the conversation is there's a lot of having John come over with having worked as hard in HEMA as he has, and I've just got time in the saddle. That's all I've got. I've got that hat time, which is you learn to mitigate fear. You learn to
tempo.
Yeah, you
breathing.
learn tempo. You learn those sorts of things. You learn the physicality. Armored fighting. I've always said it. The base currency of armored fighting is pain. It hurts to do it. And those are aspects of fighting with a sword. Fighting in general, but especially with a sword, is that you got to be okay with being really uncomfortable and afraid. And it teaches you, and then John comes in with that HEMA skill, and he starts doing weird stuff. I'm like, your angles are wrong. Stop it. it's like, what is with this offside and you're hitting with your false? What's a false edge? Aren't they both sharp?
Yeah.
you know? And it took me a minute to kind of figure out an answer for that. But then conversely, when he fought you and you had more of this technical aspect, he was also, you know, beating you up for a minute before you kind of, you know.
He doesn't fall for that. Let me just make it very clear. Chad does not fall for that anymore.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
a cheap trick.
You taught me good lessons that day.
Now, here's a question. So I've had a little bit of time to dip my toe into HEMA, and then you've had a little bit of time in armor to fight in armor. And then we've also fought, like, where I was wearing armor, you were wearing HEMA gear, we were using fetters, and we were just, like, hammer and tongs. What did you get from those experiences? I'm curious about that.
Oh, gosh. Let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
I seem to remember you saying you need more cardio.
What's that?
The first thing you said when you were done was, I need more cardio.
I think the first thing I said was, get this helmet off of me. Oh, man. I remember getting it. It was Zach's armor, right? Which, you know, it was
Terrible
heavy
armor.
stuff. Yeah.
It's like someone described what armor looked like over the phone in a language they were not a native speaker of to
so
a
true.
caricature artist that made a caricature of those ramblings. That's what it looked like.
It got me into it, though, right? And
Yeah.
so fighting Jake, I remember that John had taught me about this mace technique. And so I got in there with the punch shield and a mace, I believe, and just started, you know, trying to fight Jake. And Jake's just laughing because the first thing I do is do a proper HEMA lunge cut. And then I almost fall on my face because all of my center of gravity is now up here rather than down in here. So I almost fall on my face. And then I'm like, oh, and then Jake and I start fighting. And then I remember, John said to hit him in the lower back with the mace, and so I whipped it, and I hit you like kidney shot, and I just heard you go, and I was like, I'm doing it, and then like the next second, you got me into a grapple, and you threw me on my back, and there was nothing I could do about it, and at that point, that was like 30 seconds, and I was gassed. I was done. I couldn't breathe. I was getting like the
tunnel vision and the...
Exactly. Yeah, couldn't breathe, and I was like, get this thing off, and then I was like, that was the best thing I've ever done. So it was really exciting.
I just know there's a reason we're friends.
Dude, that was great. And then, so that same day, you also got into John's Gambison and Mask, and we did some HEMA.
Yeah.
And the first thing I noticed was, oh my gosh, they don't thrust. Because you just walked into my zone, and I was like, don't. And I like stabbed you in the face.
I'm like, I forgot about that.
No, and then you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about you guys do stabs.
Yeah.
But, you know, and then it was great. And then it was a lot of like, oops, sorry, Mike.
You're good.
And that was a lot of, you know, cut, parry work, which I love. It's fun, which was very enjoyable. And then our fencing last summer, our bout was just fantastic for me.
To this day, it's the only time I've seen anyone actually land an Obahow on his shoulder before he blocked it. It's still something I've never done.
Given you guys have armor, and I was wearing a Gajardoni challenge jacket, so mobility is my thing, speed is my thing. So that, you know, there's not saying much in that, but that was a fantastic fight. I remember you got some hits on me where I was like, I left that open. I know I left that open, and he took advantage of that, and that is my fault. There were other times where I was just like, man, I've never really tried this Verknado on somebody I could go full ham on. And then I just, you know, ping, 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 ping. And I was like, that's great. And then I think it was right after that you got that big old hit in my side. And I was like, yep, I deserve it.
Like, he's high. I'm going to take this. I'm going to straighten my arms and put my bones behind it.
Felt it. And I complimented you in the middle of the bout. I was like, that was great. But it was very interesting, but the majority of things that I've learned, and you can tell me if we can talk about this later.
Yeah, sure.
About armored fighting is from coaching John, and he's like, no, I literally can't do that. I have rims of steel right here, which eliminate my ability to cross my center that much. And I'm like, oh, okay. How can we make this work for John?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that I love, because anybody can be book smart. Anybody can say, well, the Zorn how is this, the Krump how is this, but being able to apply them in different circumstances. It's one of the reasons I love cutting, is because sometimes cutting to some HEMA practitioners there is a perfect way to do it, and if you're not standing in the right position, if your hands are not at the exact position, then that was a bad cut, even if it was essentially perfectly clean.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, if I ever fight a zombie and he's just walking up to me and I can do my perfect cuts on him, then wonderful. But I want to practice cuts where I'm off-centered, I'm taking a step out to the side, I've gone in with a few cuts, and then I'm following in with the false edge. That's the kind of stuff I love, is applied sword work, how to make it work in the moment. And I get excited.
I think that's the one thing we all share is applied sword work and a love of it. Our approaches are different, but that in essence is what drives us. And I think that's what separates at least our view of swordsmanship in the world that it coalesces around compared to a lot of other people who practice this.
And that was sort of the substance of the questions I wanted to explore on this podcast today. Is they're both achieving the same. They're different roads to achieve the same thing. And one thing that one of the many things I've discovered is that a fighting system it creates a framework, and things will evolve within their given framework. I've heard both of you say that you see me do a lot of hongen when I've got a longsword, or it's a version of hongen. And
it's actually not bad.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but again, I've never had like that formal instruction. I just do what I discover works through application.
I taught you that originally when we first met.
Hongen?
Yes.
I don't remember this.
I know you don't remember that, but remember the very, very first time we ever fought, like ever? I was wearing that terrible armor that didn't fit me.
Yeah, it was Buddy's armor, right?
It was terrible.
Was this at Winter Fair?
It was at Winter Fair.
Okay.
And
no, I remember you like taught me some strike technique when you did that very first big massage on me.
Yeah, hit, and then you bring it away.
Okay.
To your credit, you took that and evolved it and applied it differently, but the concept of a hongen after a hit, I taught you that originally.
Okay.
And then you took that, ran with it, and used it to dominate your opponents. Like, it speaks volumes about your natural athletic potential.
I appreciate that, and I guess it must have been one of those things that just rattled around my subconscious and sort of did that. But like the point that I'm making is that its application evolved within a very specific fighting system. No thrusts, continuous. It's 60-second rounds, so you don't stop after a hit or so many hits, that sort of thing. And you don't have to care if you hurt your opponent. In fact, it's a good thing. If I
can land a gap right on your what's that muscle called?
That's been hit.
Carpi
before.
radii.
I've been hit there by Grant.
And then you can't fight back for the next 5 seconds while your arm gains function.
Yeah,
that's great.
No, that actually happened to me. So my Japanese armor, that's just a big hole, and
Grant loves to just shoot
and
that.
He's only hit it once, but I mean I've fought a lot of people where they have a bigger gap there for the extra mobility, and I punish it. And then I got hit there. I'm like, oh, that's what I've been doing to people this whole time. That's horrible. This is awful. I'm a terrible person. And actually, I'm interested in your commentary as as a HEMA expert, that someone that I happen to think is quite good at what you do. What is your commentary on the comparison of how hongen has evolved in my context in looking at it through the lens of a HEMA practitioner? I'm interested in that.
I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah.
First off, though, I do not consider myself an expert, but I really appreciate that, and I take it as a compliment.
He's an expert.
I hope to someday be an expert, but I know what real experts are, and I aspire to be like that someday.
Fair enough.
Now, what I wanted to bring up at some point, so this is a perfect segue, is what's called common fencing.
Okay.
Common fencing is really funny to me because it's sort of an enigma. You don't find common fencing in historical treatises. Mm-hmm. You find how to beat people who practice common fencing in treatises, right? So what ends up happening, and this is kind of a problem in a lot of HEMA schools, is you have beginners learning to use the stuff that is made to break common fencing. And so you have two expert, huge quotations on the experts, but two people who know the secrets of swordsmanship trying the secrets on each other. So they can read the secrets, and they're like, I know that you're going to do a Krumpau because who the heck uses Schrankhut when they're not going to throw a Krumpau?
Yeah.
That's if
no one.
HEMA people are listening.
That's who.
You're right. So, but normally, right, if I were to walk up to one of you guys and I have my pommel in the air and I have my sword just off to the side, point in the ground, you're going to be like, what the crap?
Schnappin's coming, or something like that.
Maybe. If you were to press my sword down, then I can schnapp out of that. But if I'm approaching you, I can tell you right now what I'm likely going to do is wait for you to cut. I'm going to crump your sword, which is a crooked cut onto your sword to get it out of the way, then follow up with either a short cut to the head, or I turn and do a true edge cut to the head. but it's a way of baiting the opening in a perfect position for me to knock your sword out of the way and then follow up.
Yeah.
The thing is, when we don't have common fencing to practice these secret techniques again, and they literally were secret techniques, that's how these guys made their money, was teaching the secret stuff, then what we have are people knowing the secrets trying to pull off secrets on each other.
Yeah.
So,
there were answers. They were an answer to a very common problem.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the question now is, what is common fencing? And if you're really interested, a guy named Jake Norwood, who is an expert in HEMA, has a wonderful, I think it's like 2-hour-long explanation on what common fencing is.
Yeah.
But essentially, common fencing is the result, in my mind, of you are a boy who has been taught to sword fight since you were a child. You play with your friends with a sword. You hit each other with the sword. We find out that when we do this, it's easy to recover like this into a hanging position and then cut again out of it, right? It's a nice fluid circular motion,
That's all I do.
Is your bread and butter, and I love it. You're so good at it.
You're really good at it.
Thank you.
And so what I wanted to describe common fencing is the basics of how the body moves, right? So an obahau, it is a diagonal strike from above. An untahau, diagonal strike from below, right? Very, very common things. You can go into any sword school, any background, any country, and they're going to have those cuts, right? Yeah. Now, when you get into things like the shilhau and different master cuts or the secret techniques, that's when it's like, yeah, you might find those around by different names, things like that. But let me back up again. To answer your question directly, what I see is the perfect evolution of what I would consider common fencing.
Okay.
Which is a man's intuition with a sword. Okay. Without being taught, this is what you do against another man who has fantastic intuition with a sword, right? So you've got this fluid, super fluid motion. I've watched some video of you where somebody cuts, you hang, immediately follow through with a counter cut to the head. You hit him, it's either the head or the ribs, the head or the ribs. You get it every single time, and then you hit that cut, and then you immediately move into your hanging again because your opponent is taking, you know, the follow through of their cut to then swing again at you. Yeah. And you parry cut, and I love it. It's fantastic, right? And so I worked with John over the summer on these are ways to break.
How to counter that.
Yeah, how to beat
my
that.
Obnoxious undercut.
Makes me very, very angry.
That's his fault.
Sorry, Jake. If you got a soundboard angry thing, I'm ready for it.
How dare you!
I do. I have another one. Yeah, you ready? I have that too.
Well, you know that undercut where I'll hit you on your two gaps?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, man.
You know what? It's good. Pain's a good teacher.
I got a sword for it, so you can't argue a good trade.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's when that's why I love swordsmanship. There is an answer to every question.
Yeah.
There is no thing that if you do this every time, you're gonna kill them.
That's true.
Yeah.
You can get so good to the point where you're so fast or you're so clean that you get it more often than not.
Has anyone countered your Chad how, what they call it?
The Chad special?
The Chad special. Has anyone countered that yet?
Thomas and Matthew have once or twice each, but it still just comes out like...
What's the maneuver actually called?
So I think the closest thing I can find is Metal's Winger, which you cut in, you hit a hard bind, so strong on strong, the swords press, they go up, and what I do is simply take off, and then I turn the sword and cut into the ribs from underneath.
It's unbelievably efficient.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it is. Well, taking those hits to the obliques, man, that's rough. It's a rough day.
Yeah, and I usually put them like right here because I try to just make it super tight, as tight as I can.
Oh, that's a good.
Keeps them more defended.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a good way to keep that. But like that's with a heavier sword. So you'd hit the lat, and I've been hit there, and even by a sword. And when a lat spasms, it's hell.
Yeah.
It's hell because it's such a powerful muscle group. So when it says, "Hey, I'm mad at you, and I'm going to show you how mad I am at you," it's like you feel it in your fingers. You know, it's horrible.
So that technique, I am ashamed to admit this because I love people. I love people that I hate, and I hate hurting people. But I accidentally bruised my opponent's rib in a semifinals match in a tournament using that technique. I know you guys are like chump change, but
Oh no. Anyway.
Yeah, right? Oh,
Jeremy Clark. Oh no. Anyways,
do you have that on the soundboard?
I might have something for it. Hold on, let me see if I can find it.
you're talking to a man who has broken off 3 of my nails on my hand. He has given me a bruise so bad that the next time I fought him, it was still there 2 weeks later.
Well, I'm not saying like that's like a chump change injury. It's like, hey, I mean, those feathers don't weigh anything.
They don't weigh anything.
They don't weigh anything. So if you're getting enough heat on it, like, good for you. And honestly, look, I mean, you're hitting each other with metal objects.
He knew what he was up. He knew what was going to happen.
Right, and he took it in the right light, and he was like,
Good for him.
this was my responsibility to not let that happen, and I learned from it. And he's the kind of guy who learns from his injuries.
I think high form HEMA will continue to foster that, because I mean, if nothing else, high form fighting is just so damn fun, and at some point you got to make a choice. Do we get butthurt about bruises, or do we continue to push the envelope on and really rediscover this art?
Right.
And I have to say that I do actually really appreciate HEMA. I appreciate both of these sports for changing my paradigm. I used to think stupid things like longswords were clunky because they were meant to kill armor.
It's okay.
Moment of silence for Jake's previous pride.
Yeah, I used to think that, and armored fighting helped dispel that, and then HEMA helped me appreciate the complexity and sophistication of Western combat. It really is. It really is. I'm like, damn, our ancestors are badasses.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. I love this conversation. When people, okay, all right, I'm getting heated. I'm cooling it down.
Okay.
Right. So I get pissed off when people say, well, these are modern times, we know better. If they said not to do this, well, I can do it because I'm an elevated being. No, you're a freaking... censoring my language. You're a piece of crap.
You're a monkey with anxiety.
Settle down. That's it. It's like, so you're trying to tell me, if you were to go to, let's keep it basic, a journeyman, a framing journeyman, after a lifetime of building houses, skyscrapers, of building buildings.
Yeah.
And you go and you say, well, I found that if I swing my hammer really high, then I can just plant those nails in, so that's what I'm going to do. And he says, no, you want to keep them nice and low, forceful, right? And then he say, well, this is a new age. I know what I'm doing. You're a part of the past. You have no idea. The people that we're talking about, these guys, this was their livelihood. Yeah, just like John said, if it didn't work, you didn't live long enough to
spread bad.
Yeah. Offspring. Sort of offspring. And so the reason I get so passionate about this is, in my opinion, and I will stand by this hopefully till the day I die, is if there is a technique that we don't understand, it is because we don't understand it. It's not because it's a dumb technique.
Vexelhow.
The Vexelhow. It's such a beautiful thing.
Yes.
It's such a beautiful thing. And there are some plays where I'm like, I just don't really know
unscrewing your pommel and throwing it. I don't think that's real. That's got to be a joke.
Tim Rightly is a joke.
So,
that's got to be a joke.
You guys want to know what it is?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me what this is.
I'm asked this more than anything else when people see me in armor.
Okay.
Can you explain Tim Rightly?
So this is my current understanding. That was a tournament system where you needed to throw one of your weapons.
Okay.
And you'd start with a spear, sword, and dagger.
So if you throw a pommel, you get to keep your spears?
Oh.
That's 100% it. So basically...
It's gamification. It's cheating without cheating.
It's meta. So
I love
meta gaming. I love it.
A Westerner would do that, but a samurai wouldn't.
No,
and that's why we were beating them all that back in the day.
I'll kick dirt in your face. I don't give a shit.
Pocket sand.
Dude, pocket sand is my favorite.
That's got it. Those Portuguese pirates were probably doing that exact shit.
You had to throw something.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, you can throw your pommel.
That's hilarious. So they had specially made swords for that.
Yeah, they actually screwed on.
Threaded.
No kidding. They were threading that early. That's cool.
You can see it. They had screws all the way back then. Heck, screws can actually be...
Rome had threaded
Archimedes
stuff.
screws were a screw system, a water pump that predates Archimedes.
That's cool.
Yeah, they had the technology for a long time.
Interesting.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
But that stuff gets me so excited. 'Cause it's like, imagine a guy throws his javelin and you're like, man... If I could just keep this.
Speaking of which, I have a theory on the weird pointed forward toes on Sabatons. that we saw. You asked me a long time ago, why did they do that? And I told you I have no idea.
It's got to be equine, so you like kick a dude
It's
in
for
the face.
equine only.
Yeah.
So they tend to come forward and they point down.
Yeah.
Because the proper way to mount a horse in armor back in the day was to put your foot in the stirrup and turn it around towards the back of the horse and then mount. And as you mount, your foot comes back. And if it didn't come down and curve down, you would stab your horse.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
Got it. So they curved it down so you didn't poke your horse.
The horse when you're riding.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, and the horse bucks you off. You've got one ankle in the. Yeah. Smart.
And I've heard that they just kept, just like rapiers, they just kept making them longer because it became fashionable to who had the longest toes.
Yeah. That sounds an awful lot like the Germans.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's some
and
German
people who
shit.
swing around swords, let's be honest, it is a phallic measuring contest.
That's true.
My slippers are so much longer than yours.
I'm not going to use these in battle.
I can't do the accent, I'm sorry.
I love the idea of I'm not going to use these in battle, but damn, am I going to look good walking into it?
Hey, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that, guys.
I prefer to just win.
Presentation.
The inside joke is my team calls me the peacock because I got the fanciest, prettiest stuff.
Yeah, like
It's
he
beautiful.
forewent a couple years of fighting in order to get nice, ultra nice stuff. Meanwhile, I'm walking around in basically dumpster armor, like winning tournaments.
It's like he's cosplaying as
cool.
Oscar the Grouch.
Yeah, seriously.
Dude, his old armor, not his new armor. His new armor is beautiful.
Thank you.
But his old armor, seriously, like...
It does look like shit.
It really does, man. You know what?
It does look like shit.
Yes. All right, what's the next question?
Let's see.
like
What
it.
is that? Yeah, our next item here.
How much time we got?
Let's see. So you got till 6, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we are at 5:40, so it might be a good time just to summarize and
Oh,
wrap it
shoot.
up.
Well, what's your last question?
Let's see. We may not really have time to get into this because we didn't had time to have Chad swing around the katana with you. But I was interested in there's a number of different fighting styles. Like again, to the crayon eating BOHURT fighter, I see books and I run away. But there's Italian, there's German, there's French. There's a variety of fighting styles in that ecosystem, and they're all a bit different. Again, reliant on the same principles, they're just different applications, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, John explores swords a lot, historical swords, and I look at like the way the Italians made swords and armor. I look at the way the Germans did it, the way the English did it, and again,
It fits cultural sensibilities.
yeah, sure, and then I look at and then I've gotten a real big, eye-opening experience with like just dipping my toe in Heiden Gumdo, which is Korean fighting with a katana. And how the fighting style lends itself to the way the sword performs based on its geometry, and I go, I wonder if, it's okay. What's the association between a weapon's geometry and the fighting style, right? They do correspond. Italian, like that Italian sword that you're basing your new one off of.
Yes.
The fighting style lends itself. I think you could say that Italian swordplay lends itself to that cross section, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and so the question becomes, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the swordsmen develop? They were fighting, and they're like, well, I really need it to do this, and they go talk to the weaponsmiths and have it engineered, or did the weaponsmiths go, well, we're running into these kinds of failures in use, so we'll make this as an answer, and then the swordsmen would learn around that new geometry. That's the question. And you've got till 6, and it's 25 to 6, so I'm thinking, why don't we put a pin in this? And we'll get together another time. What do you guys think about that?
I think that sounds fantastic.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I think in the interim, our homework is we got to get Chad messing around with a katana and have that experience. So we have, the historian aspect of that can have that same experience that I did and how they act, and then you can also send me some stuff over with different swords from different places that when those historical European martial art techniques were in use. So swords contemporary to the styles, and then we can come back. We can come back next week or the week after and figure that out.
I'd like that.
All right, cool. Well,
Sounds cool.
guys, thank you so much for doing this. We're just gonna wrap this thing up.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Folks, thanks for listening. I'm Chad. This is Jonathan and Jake. Like, I did that so wrong. I'm Jake, Jonathan, and Chad. Look, it's my first
Everyone wants to be a
podcast.
swolesome Chad.
Yeah, everybody wants to be a swolesome Chad, but this was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to do this again. Guys, just get out me at Fightsword Radio on YouTube. You can see fight videos, and you can see fight videos that we record at practice and competition, And as well as you can find more podcast episodes as they become available. We'll be trying to do this on a weekly basis. Thanks a lot.